there. But now, because he's alive, when you are to receive him, you come to know a lot of things originally didn't understand. And you tell me that's what happened to Paul. He didn't believe. We, our forebearers, know God. Shama, there is only one God. And the human beings in our midst and his people claiming to be somebody. It's nonsense, annoying. You see, in such mood.
Paul says that Jesus appeared to 500 brothers at one time, but none of the Gospels say this.
Well, whatever it is, they are not interested to say it, but he in particular, he's not convinced.
If you look at the ending of Mark, Jesus doesn't appear to anyone, but in Matthew he appears to the women as well as to the male disciples in Galilee. In the Gospel of Luke he appears to the two on the road to Emmaus. There's a mention of Peter appearing to Peter, and then he appears to the disciples in the upper room in Jerusalem. And then finally in John's Gospel he appears to Mary Magdalene as well as to the disciples. And then he reappears again to Thomas. And then in chapter 21 it starts all over again where a further appearance is made in Galilee. So John has the most amount of appearances. So there does seem to be a development where the number of times in which Jesus appears to people is increased and the appearances become more definite and more physical.
That's true.
Because he says, touch me not, a flesh and bone has no, as you see me have. But Paul says that flesh and bones cannot inherit the kingdom of God, like in Corinthians.
Yeah. So that's what, it's just like a seed. Jesus himself said, unless a seed is fallen, it remains the same. This physical body has to die before we inherit the kingdom. But now the kingdom is here already. The kingdom is already here. And I just like ambassadors, like Iran ambassador or what's ambassador in UK here. But as we are not permanently dwelling here, you understand, this thing will manifest after. Let me run up to say, when you read those things, you are very close. When I read those things, I prayed to God Almighty in my own dialect. Because originally I didn't know who Jesus is. He was born a human being. How can a human being become God Almighty? You understand? Like I was saying, the addition of Mark, whereby I read John 14, Jesus is promising, which I know we are all going to face that when the days of our life come to an end. Where do we go? And this is the solemn promise. This man, by that time I was calling him man, Jesus has promised that those who believe in him, there is a praise for them.
You know what's interesting about John chapter 14 is part of the farewell discourse, the Last Supper. And in John chapter 16, part of the same discourse, in chapter 16 verse 5, Jesus actually complained that none of the disciples were asking him where he was going. But in chapter 14 they do actually ask him, Lord, show us the way, and Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth and the life. So
it's continuation this time. Now,
so it does seem to be like a contradiction where he says none of you are asking me where, but then they did 2 chapters before or 1 chapter before.
Well, in my own simple understanding, this is it. You come to know someone who will raise someone who is dead even for 3 days. You understand? So to say that he's going to die. You remember when Peter said, Peter told him, you are Christ, the Son of the living God. He said, you are upon this, or you are a rock. Upon this rock, you are Petra. Upon this rock, I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. And I've given you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind, you bind heaven. Now, and he told them.
You must remember that the Gospels were written in different locations over time. They were not written by the same person and given to one and say, hey, read all of this. But eventually they will be put together and put into the Bible as we have them now, so you can compare them. So when we read them vertically, we have them all amalgamated like as one single story. But the reality is Mark was written in Rome, Matthew was written in Caesarea, John in Ephesus, and Luke was Ephesus, so Luke was Caesarea, and Matthew, anyway, 4 different places, not written by the same authors, but 4 different locations written over time. So in John's Gospel, when Jesus says, for example, in John about the resurrection, so he raises Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11, who has been in his tomb for 3 or 4 days. And it says that to the extent that his body now stinketh.
Yeah, that's what it says. Yeah.
But in Luke's Gospel, Luke has it that the man that Jesus raises from the dead he's already in his coffin. He's not yet buried, but he's on his way.
That's the
And
woman of Nain. It's a different.
That's right. Yeah. Luke chapter 7.
The son of that widow.
And Matthew has Jairus' daughter, where Jairus says to Jesus that my daughter has just died, so come and do something for her so that she may live. But Mark has it that the daughter is at the point of death. So Jairus says to Jesus, come and do something for her so that she might be well and live. So there is a development where in Jairus, the daughter is at the point of death, whereas in Matthew, she has just died. Whereas in Luke, the person is now already in his coffin. Whereas in John, the person has been in his grave for 4 days or 3 days. So there is an, the amount of time in which the person is declared to be dead is extended as you go from Mark the first to Matthew and Luke and then finally John.
Yeah, if you study that, it's not the gospel.
So, you know, Mark has Jesus, Jairus, when he comes to Jesus, and he says, teacher, my daughter is at the point of death, so come and do something for her so that she may be well and live. And eventually Jesus goes on, and then a message comes from Jairus' house saying not to teach anymore because your daughter is now dead. But Jesus nonetheless persists and says she's not dead, but she's only sleeping. And then he goes to and says in Aramaic, little girl, get up and rise. And then he bids them to command them not to tell anyone about this. But Matthew has that when Jairus came up to Jesus, he says to Jesus, my daughter has just died, so come and do something for her so that she may live, as opposed to Mark, my daughter is at the point of death. So you can compare Mark chapter 5 with Matthew chapter 9, and you can put your finger in Mark and then flip over to Matthew.
It's true, and I know you as
Matthew has extended.
A man of humble spirit, and as a scholar, we don't.
I'm not a scholar, by the way.
We don't pinpoint this. You see,
I'm a support worker.
You look at that. All the writings, all these arguments, where is it leading us to? You understand? This is what I found out. Yes, if you look at the Bible, you may find some sort of discrepancy, but does it matter? All those, the family of Abraham, those kings and queens, some who when they were 18 years, others 8 years, and some have been pointing because of these minor things. What is this leading us to? When God picked this one person after the fall of man, he decided to reveal himself to the whole world, to save the human race from this man Abraham. So it was imperative, important for all those families, those men and women who came from this man, Abraham. It was written for us to look. But the focus, like Jesus said, you continue to look, search through the scriptures, thinking in them you find salvation. But all what is written, they are pointing to me. So the cumulative, this thing is about this particular person. You understand? That men and women may come to know you. You remember when he called Abraham, he said, through you, your seed, I'll say I'll bless them, through your seed, I'll bless the whole world.
That's right.
When Abraham was willing to offer his son, he promised again, through your seed, I vow by myself that through you, you will not deny me your son. Through you, I'll bless you and I'll bless the seed. And in the life of his son, Isaac also, the same thing. He said, through your seed, I'll bless the whole world. And even the life of Jacob, when he was running, when he saw the gate of heaven, God spoke the same thing, through your seed. And it will interest you to find out that the seed he was talking about is through the Abraham seed, which is Jesus Christ, where a lady was give birth to this person. And that seed. That's
Do you not believe in the virgin birth? So Jesus had no biological or physical father. So he was born miraculously.
That's
so
true.
in that sense, Jesus wasn't the son of Abraham. Because you know the seed comes from the father.
Yeah, it's naturally.
Because the X and Y chromosomes come from the father, that determines the sex of the child. But Jesus was born miraculously.
No, I mean, we believe in God, with him nothing is impossible. He has the power to do everything. Some people argue a child who is in the womb is weak, a child is weak. God has the power, because the end is what matters. He died, what happened? But let me ask you this question.
But I'm just saying, because he can't be the seed of Abraham because he was born of a virgin.
No, but still through first Joseph accepted that, yes, that lady will be stoned to death.
But Joseph was his adopted.
Theoretically.
But you know, the inheritance, they go to the stay within the tribe.
The father,
Like
the father.
to the physical.
Joseph
So James was the son of was the brother, like half brother of Jesus, but he was the physical son of Joseph. So the inheritance would go to
If
James.
he has not accepted the woman, because the angel spoke to him, they would have sown that lady to them. So he accepted the progress. Yeah, the father. Yes.
But you know, Joseph had children before Jesus. So either he was married before,
Whatever it
or
is,
maybe he had them after.
whatever it
But
is. Yeah.
so
Now,
his other children would have more rights.
yeah, now let me ask you this question, which I know you'll be honest. Now, hear this. The death and the crucifixion and the death of Jesus Christ. In the first century, it did not happen in a secretive place or in a secret place. It happened like here. A lot of people went there during the Roman Empire. Now. But why is it
Mark's
that
gospel, there is no actually witnesses. So Mark has it that the women watch from afar,
there's witnesses
but
in
there's no one at the foot of the cross.
No, in
But
that
in
of
John's
John and in the
gospel,
Matthew,
you have the mother
centurion.
and the beloved disciple
And
at the foot.
Matthew also, the centurion who crucified him, testified. And this is the Son of God. My question is it not strange for you that Islam, which came 600 years later, is negating something that really happened, and people are buying to
The
it?
Quran doesn't deny the crucifixion.
They deny it.
What the
No
Quran
Muslim
says,
believe.
it appeared to them so. That he was
and
crucified.
Can you just
So if he appeared to them, it means that there was a crucifixion. It's just that Christ wasn't crucified.
yeah, that's
or
what they said. That Christ
wasn't
actually,
killed.
how would they crucify? Yeah, but in actual fact, he was crucified. He died.
But you know, people did survive crucifixion from what we know
Jesus.
from
If
history.
you look at the centurion, one day because it was Sabbath, Friday evening, they need to break their legs so that they cannot run away. When they read Jesus Christ, they have. He has
so
already
they
died.
see.
And if you read
But-
the Hebrew,
so
those ones, I always wonder why they're still in doubt, because it has been written clearly visible that the Messiah has to suffer.
Quran says they have no certain knowledge. They follow conjecture for certainty they
You
killed
see,
him not.
if you read the book
but
of
God
Isaiah,
raised him
it
up.
tells us that he has to suffer. You read, it's so visible, clear, and yet they are rejecting it.
Isaiah
It happened with the song, but
53.
this day they rejected, because they thought the Messiah would descend from heaven with no apparent, just like miraculously. That's what they were thinking. That's what, and they are still waiting, which there will be no more Messiah till the end comes.
Doesn't Isaiah 53 says that God will extend or prolong his life of the servant so that he can witness his offspring? But Jesus, according to you, died and then resurrected.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah,
so his life wasn't
You
extended.
see, come on, look at that. Look at that. Don't misquote it. You see, he suffered his soul. He poured his soul for it. It's written clearly. Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been with? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of the ground. He has no form of comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty in him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief, and we hide as if our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he bore our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgression. He was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes.
So who's the voice? Like, who's the narrator in this chapter? So when it says he was wounded for our transgression, who's the owl referring to?
Now, this is the prophet Isaiah, whom the Spirit of God has come upon. In those days, that's how. It wasn't an angel. I've experienced that. One day I will tell you how I personally experienced that. Someone was speaking through me. Now I can stop.
Well, if you read the context in chapter 52 of Isaiah, it begins from roughly verse 10. Is in reference to the Babylonians. So the Babylonians are speaking,
hear this. And
saying...
Now look at here. It can never refer to that.
You have to look at the context.
And we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. For he was oppressed and was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to be slaughtered, and as a sheep before his shearers. So he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. Who will declare this to generation? He was cut from the land of living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, and but with the rich his
Isn't
death.
this the Babylonian king speaking?
No.
And he's like being repentant.
No, this is the Spirit of God upon the prophet
So
Isaiah.
when he says my people, he means the Babylonians.
No, not the Babylonians. I will bring you to somewhere.
Okay.
Because he has done no violence, nor was any lying in his mouth. Yet it pleases long to bruise him. He put him to grief. When he made his soul an offering for what? An offering for what? Sin.
Well, it doesn't say sin.
He made his soul an offering for sin. He shall see his
okay, I
seed,
see what you mean here.
and he shall prolong his days. And the pressure of the Lord God will prosper in his hand. The pressure of the Lord, as he has promised Abraham, I'll bless through you, I'll bless this, through your seed, I'll bless the human race or the whole world. So the pressure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. He shall see his labor, and the labor is the Christians that has dominated the whole world. He shall see his labor, he shall see the labor of his soul.
Yeah,
and he
but
shall
you
be
know the
satisfied.
Hebrew word there is zera? And zera means physical children, physical descendants.
Yeah. What about physical descendants? They're like the Christians we call.
It's the same word that's used in Genesis, with Abraham, that God will multiply his seed.
So
The Hebrew word is zera.
Now all Christians are the seed of Jesus Christ. You are the seed.
Spiritually, but not literally.
Yeah, but whatever it is,
But this is speaking about physical or literal.
Whatever it is, then you see that there's prosperity in the labor, what he accomplished. Have you found out that since 2,000 years, Christianity has accumulated, dominated the whole world every day now? Hey, look here. He shall
You
see the
consider
labor.
Catholics
He
to be
shall see the
Christian.
labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge, this is where it triggered me when I read it. By his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many. That's where it triggered me.
Which verse?
Verse 11. By
okay,
his knowledge, we all sin as it is here and come short of the glory. By his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many, including you. How is he going to do it? For he shall bear their iniquities. How is he going to? We are going to be justified by taking our iniquities upon ourselves.
This isn't about moral guilt, but this is a person who's repenting from the way they've treated Israel, God's servant. Because in Isaiah chapter 49 verse 3, for example, Israel is identified as the suffering servant. So God refers to Israel as my servant.
My servant whom I now.
So shall I show you?
Yeah, 49. Now, it's very interesting that those, even now I refer those things to me because it refers to me personally.
You are my servant.
Yeah, and you I will be glorified. In you, and
yeah,
I,
you know it.
I have taken that upon myself because God is telling me in you, because He has told me. And when I was in Germany, my servant was trying to glorify me. So when I found out here, God was speaking to me, and I started crying. I've wasted my life in searching for vanity, working to earn money, but I will let God have His final say. It's very true. He shall see, He shall bear the iniquity. He shall justify many. How is He going to do it? By bearing our iniquity.
So Jesus, for example, in verse 9, Isaiah 53, says a grave was assigned among the wicked, but Jesus was inside a tomb rather than a grave. And the tomb was just temporary because He was supposed to be buried.
And He shall divide the spoil.
So Jesus was assigned a tomb rather than a grave. And He did defend Himself, like when He protested in the Gospel of John in chapter 18 verse 23. So Jesus did open His mouth, like He defended Himself before the high priest, and also I believe before Pontius Pilate. Like to Pilate He says that I taught publicly.
So what I'm showing you, if you find out, all these verses define clearly. Because here, therefore I will divide a portion with him with the great. That's the enemy who has taken hold. And he shall divide the spoil with the strong. Because he poured out his soul unto death. He poured out his soul unto death.
Which verse is that?
Yes, he poured out his soul unto death.
Follow you.
That the last verse.
Is that the last verse?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's the 12. Therefore, I will divide him a portion of the great, because Satan has taken hold. Now here, if we go to Acts chapter 8, there was a Jewish man. There was a Jewish man who was reading this,
And he was from Ethiopia.
and he didn't understand it, just like the same verse. And interestingly, a man of God like you and I were preaching here, the Spirit told him to go there. And he went. And this version, you see, is consistent with someone he's a Jew. So when this man of God, Philip, reached there, the Spirit told him, go there. And he saw the man reading this version. And the Enoch asked him, is he talking about himself? Then from there, he used that.
You know, the Bible prohibits child sacrifice. So God, you know, there's different types of sacrifices in the Bible. Some are for sin, and others are like thanksgiving offerings, and some may even be like a test. So in the case of Abraham in Genesis, God tests Abraham with his son. But in the case of sacrificing, God prohibited the Jews from sacrificing their own children to him. So why would then God himself sacrifice his own son for sin when he himself told the Jews not to sacrifice their own children as sin offerings?
God bless my brother. I know you love God. Now it's...
So shall I show you? It's in Deuteronomy.
yeah, it's true. Without doubt, it's true. It's true. Now. If you go to Leviticus, you know the temple was in Jerusalem. You know what? And what were they doing there? You remember when the temple was there? Sacrifice. The life of the flesh is in the blood. So I've given upon my altar to atone for your soul.
That particular verse, no, Zaki, thank you, Shazakala. So that particular verse is about the prohibition as to why Jews are not permitted to eat or drink blood. Because of life in the blood.
That's where you took it from.
But it's also in Acts as well. You know, Acts of the Apostles in Acts.